striking while the iron is frozen solid. But hey, better late than never, right? I've always had a soft spot for survival horror, ever since I was a kid playing Resident Evil for the first time and thinking it was going to be a fast-paced action game. I was disarmed by the live-action intro, and I mean, look at that face. What's even happening on this cover?
I got a shotgun.
But in reality, it played out more like Predator or From Dusk Till Dawn, a secret horror game. Okay, it was secret to me. But nowadays, when I get in the mood for the spooky month, I find myself returning to that mansion over and over and over. You get the idea. And for every Lost in Vivo and Remorse the List, I end up spending most of October at the Spencer Estate. Maybe I'm just terrible at picking games for myself. But I was recommended something a while ago that might just be the thing I've been looking for. Signalis was made by Rose Engine, a German development team consisting of Yuri Stern and Barbara Whitman, or Babs on Twitter. The story of Signalis takes place in an alternate universe where humanity is spread across 6 planets under the banner of the Usan Empire. We start in the middle of a civil war between the militaristic nation of Usan and the previously mentioned Greater Usan Empire, with each side having half of the system under their control. Your ship, the Penrose 512, is a scouting vessel assigned with finding habitable worlds within the Oort Cloud, the hypothetical outer rim of our solar system, and with it, resources to benefit the Usan nation. There could be something out there, but you think with a war going on, the nation would put those resources to use on-world instead of throwing them into space. More to the point, we play as a biomechanical replica unit with a designation LSTR, or Elster, a spacecraft technician and combat engineer. Exploring the empty halls of the Penrose, a manual states that each Penrose ship has a crew of 2 people, an Elster unit and a Gestalt pilot. Yeah, not even a small team, this is a skeleton crew, and our human pilot is nowhere to be seen. Well, I mean, she looks human, like she doesn't have horse legs or anything, right? But where are we right now? First things first, we need access to our hazard suit to venture outside, and this is when we get introduced to the basic mechanics. And with it, one of the most unintentionally funny sounds for picking up items. Even though there is combat in Signalis, you'll spend a good chunk of your time managing resources and solving puzzles. Traditional survival horror stuff. You can even consider the combat encounters puzzles themselves, but more on that later cause we gotta get out of here. I definitely didn't expect this on my first playthrough. Even though we're out in the open, first-person sections in horror games usually meant a scare was around the corner, so I was expecting the worst. Well, that and it reminds me of scratches. We then find a strange gate, and not too far from it, there's a pit with a tunnel. Oh no, there's a bedroom on the other side. Someone's clearly been here if the furnishings are any indication. There's a flag of the nation, an excessively locked safe, and there was a hole here. It's gone now. Our only option is to brush up on some distinct literature.
I got a letter.
Or a photo. Like before, we're looking for a Gestalt named Alina Seo? Wait, were we dreaming on the toilet? I don't know, my face hurts for some reason. We're currently on the Sierpinski mining facility, on the planet Lang, a stand-in for Pluto. The design itself is rather dull and utilitarian, but right off the bat, you can tell something's off. This is a vocational school. Having a level within a more grounded area, you could at least imagine it being somewhere where students and teachers can hang out. You can make a case for that in later areas, but here it's just entirely devoid of life. So it just reminds me of college. The most flair you see from anything are these posters that act as diegetic tutorials, and then it hits you. Oh.
1984.
Suddenly the interior makes more sense. The nation of Wusan is totalitarian, with a tight leash on, everything, namely expression. This isn't just a trade school, it's a correctional facility. You get sent here if you do or say anything that the nation deems problematic. Don't carry contraband, don't befriend the replicas, and don't steal posters. Even before all the nightmares and screaming Lego people, it's difficult to separate what was here prior to the events of the game. Was the bloody interrogation room here before? There are files here that suggest so, and also its, usefulness. Were these areas repurposed because of some incident on the base? Or were they always here? You don't really know in these first few areas. Let that sink in for a bit. And speaking of tasteful aesthetics, even though the nation has space rockets and space replicas, technology like microfilms and videotapes are still being used. The calibration pod at the start of the game even sounded like my old dial-up modem. Or you could just call it cassette futurism if your hobbies include being shoved in lockers. Like me. But even with all that, you can still feel the Silent Hillism starting to creep in a bit. The low but effective use of lighting subtly guides the player through these foreboding halls. And through it all, you just feel utterly isolated. The scant few that aren't attacking you are too busy freaking out in a corner, or just straight up refusing to make the situation better. You're here to find answers, but as you descend, you only come up with more questions. Worldbuilding aside, this game looks amazing. You might be like me and think that the textures themselves seem less detailed than the PS1 games that it was probably inspired from. Like, the models don't even have faces. Okay, yeah, it's another retro-inspired survival horror game. What of it? Well, here's the thing. The simplicity of the textures make the character designs actually stand out. Every replica unit has a simple design, with a few unique traits. For example, the storks are 7'10" chromed-out Amazonians that literally tower over most other replicas. But even disregarding my fetishes, the Elster is the only replica that's characterized by a deep orange on her body. So no matter what, you'll never really lose track of where she is on screen. She's effectively wearing those high-visibility reflective vests. These noticeable traits go in the complete opposite direction when discussing the enemies, making them all the more horrifying. Are these replicas? They seem to be. Elster identifies the first infected corpse we see as an Euler unit, but the strange thing is that another one down the hall is the same kind of replica. So what happened? Are they sick? Their coloring is more decrepit, the bright whites traded for a dull gray, and what looks like raw wounds all over. The only thing they really share with their normal counterparts would be their silhouette, because the areas themselves aren't exactly well lit. The lighting can be sparse, but it's always effective. And look how they're almost entirely cast in shadow. They even have this distorted effect surrounding them when they're active. I don't trust that wall. And despite how the models lack facial features, later in the game, some of the Euler units even have glowing eyes. While they don't look like the Mega Bloks people from my nightmares and cutscenes, the low poly and obscured models have your mind fill in the blanks, which can be even more terrifying when the newer enemies are introduced. Even after you find a medical log explaining the symptoms of this mystery sickness, you still aren't given a direct cause until way later. That's what I'd call the atmosphere in this game. It's sickly. The air seems so stuffy, with the haze so thick in most areas you could choke on it. Like the coloring and the lighting is indicative of an environment that's decaying around me. It's old-fashioned and wasting away, and with this top-down perspective, it really does make Elster seem small. The tight corridors make you feel like a rat in a maze. Even in the later areas, you don't gain a sense of security because the areas open up. Now the threats could come from anywhere. There's so much care and thought put not only into the environment, but also to the other smaller elements like the way that items look in your inventory. Rose Engine went the extra step to accurately model the amount of bullets for each stack. See how the speed loader for this revolver has 6 shots? Makes sense. But what if I only have 3? What about more than 6? These little inventory details extend to some other weapons as well. It's great. The last little thing I wanted to mention was how there's little HUD elements that bump up the immersion. I want to believe that despite not explicitly being in first person, everything we're seeing is from Elster's perspective. It sounds obvious, but hear me out. They went hard with how damage is conveyed. Your vision glitches, the border glows red, and the audio even gets muffled when you take a hit. Your vision becomes monochromatic when taking serious damage. These effects even persist to the menus. Even having a crosshair when aiming doesn't come off as video gamey because you're literally a robot with your own UI. The logic here is grounded, instead of just being a gameplay contrivance. Now if you couldn't tell, Signalis was inspired by a bunch of things, and they're very upfront with it. The Silent Hill inspirations are obvious. There are parallels to Dead Space and so many more homages to various movies and anime within the same cutscene. But despite me having gripes with things like that in the past, it's actually one of the game's biggest strengths. Because even if those homages go right over your head, the game still has some fantastic visuals and moments. It's all in service to make the tone and the world that much more bizarre and alien. Just because I can recognize a reference to something here, that doesn't hamper the overall experience. It's not distracting. It's transformative, and I can't understate how much I love it. But how does it play? I'm gonna ruin the mystique a bit. I didn't use tank controls. Signalis plays like how you'd expect from a survival horror game, and mechanically, it's not that deep. However, unlike many survival horror games that probably inspired Signalis, the game tries to remedy some of the trappings the survival horror genre has had with some of the more classic titles. That sounds dramatic, but the small things this game does help so much in the long run. A good example of this is the camera. Having fixed angles are good for setting the mood and drawing the player's attention to certain things. But there are some cases where the scuffles can get a bit too hairy from the camera being like this. It can obscure your character if there are too many enemies around you, and if you aren't careful, you're going to be running into them on accident. Signalis has all of their third-person sections shown top-down, more static and potentially less cinematic, but when you enter a room, the enemies and items are in clear view, meaning that there are almost no jump scares. It's convenient and allows the player to easily scan the environment, because on your first playthrough, you're expected to play slow and methodical. Let's take shooting for example. When aiming, you get a laser sight, and more importantly, a crosshair that shrinks the longer you're locked onto someone. The crosshair will also tell you if you have a direct shot on your target. If there's a part of the environment that blocks you and the target, then the crosshair will let you know. Also, you turn to what you're aiming, but you don't snap to them, so if you panic and try to do a full 180, it's really easy to beef your shots. And shooting first without assessing your surroundings is a quick way to get you surrounded. Even if enemies don't have line of sight, they can still hear you, which includes running, shooting, and playing classical music on your radio. And speaking of the radio, early on you get introduced to my favorite enemy in the game, the Colibri, with the funny little quirk of scaring the shit out of you. You can try and brute force it normally by shooting it, but they summon doppelgangers, so it's unclear to know which one is real. The correct way to combat them is by using your radio, and setting the frequency to the numbers that are on screen. And while it staggers, the real one appears for a second, letting you pop off a few shots. They're relatively fragile, but they're meant to make you panic. And shooting on sight is a good way to alert the whole squad. When dealing with any group, it's best to deal with enemies one at a time. While there are consistent ways of dealing with every replica, damage is still something I would call inconsistent. I'm playing on the hardest difficulty, and I walk into this room with 2 nurses. They go down in 3 shots each. Makes sense? Okay, now what about this one? I didn't even lock onto it for that long. Was it because it didn't notice me? I don't get it. This isn't even the last time this happens either. I'm just convinced the damage is random. Double kill. It goes without saying, but you shouldn't rely on this. If you're trying to manage resources, you already don't want to be plugging everyone you see. In classic RE, you potentially had 8 item slots, but here you only have 6. You're stuck with Chris Redfield's tiny pockets, which is problematic because you're tripping all over this stuff. Thankfully, the game does throw you a bone with map icons, displaying doors that you've already interacted with. Taking the initiative to chart out everything gives you a good way to manage which path you should take, and what rooms are important to you on your second lap around. And honestly, the maps aren't that big. Even when the game decides to take away your map, most of the rooms are so recognizable, they can be used as landmarks. No longer do players have to suffer game devs taking inspiration from Shepherd's Glen. The biggest tip I can give is to always reload at save rooms, but never take any spare ammo with you, since you'll most likely come across some in the field. This all sounds pretty tedious, but I love these kinds of games. Even though survival horror has aspects that make it seem like it's going for the video game CBT championship, okay, that's a bit harsh. But planning things out and juggling so much makes it all the more satisfying when everything pans out. Here's an example. 2 nurses that take like 3 hits minimum if you got time to line up your shots, but having to deal with both of them in this confined space is a real bad idea. Thankfully, I got 3 stun batons on me. Despite being a non-lethal option, it knocks them over so we can stomp them. And it's more economic to put them on a commission like Isaac Clarke. Or Seth Rollins. Although it's sadly not as cathartic, there's no meaty crunch or anything. I guess that's what happens when you don't have feet. I used 2 stun batons to get 2 healing items, and a few shotgun shells for the big bads I gotta face later on. A good trade. The plan worked well, and I feel like a big man. Wait, they get back up? We have Crimson Heads too? Oh no, is this like Martian Gothic? I'm not sure what triggers it exactly, but in my experience, if you enter a room with a downed enemy too many times, they will get back up. Thankfully, it's not as serious since they don't get buffed or anything. They actually seem to have less health than before. You could spend a thermite flare to put one enemy down permanently, but you don't get plenty of them early on. So more often than not, stealthing is your best friend. Enemies getting back up doesn't just exist for inconveniencing the player. More than anything, the fact they get back up tells you that in-universe, these might not just be the usual crazies or zombies. Like, are they of the Dan O'Bannon variety? I hope not. But what if I told you that one of the most effective ways of dealing with minor enemies wasn't a weapon at all? What if there was a way to solve most, if not all, the problems I mentioned already when it comes to resource management? One of the best tools when avoiding enemies is in fact these hands. Because fisting isn't an option, we instead opt for the way of the open hand. Behold the mighty push. No longer will you have to fear mechanical women pinning you down in the halls. Dicey encounters now become trivial, and with some evasive maneuvers, you traverse these nightmarish halls with ease. This was clearly meant to force yourself from enemies to get a cleaner shot, but running up to someone and giving them the left-footed shove has led to some hilarious moments because it's just so effective. You can even interrupt attacks with this if your timing is right. It's not on the level of Leon's kick from RE4, but even if you're forced to spend some lead, the shove is a nice option to remember. Especially if you're already beelining it to a door. Similar to the stomp, I wish there was a sound that played when you use this, but honestly, the lack of one is almost funnier.
Bitch.
Signalis can be difficult, but you can tell that Rose Engine didn't want to make the experience a bad one, so they sprinkled in some small mercies here and there. I already alluded to the level subtly guiding you with the use of lights, but there's also a little quirk with the inventory. If you have full pockets, but your gun isn't fully loaded, you can actually reload with spare bullets you find on the floor. Something that I only really noticed on my second playthrough. Would have been handy in the RCPD. Also, the flare gun is the most powerful gun in the game. That's kind of a random thing to point out. That's because the game gives you no build-up for it, but can still annihilate almost every enemy in the game with a single shot, on the hardest difficulty. Revolver? Miss me with that. The flare gun is my Rutger, my boss killer, and I don't have to jump through any hoops to get it. Forget consistent, moderate damage. I want obscene damage over time. That staggers them so hard due to you literally cooking them from the inside out. And I don't have to go through a full stack of ammo like something else I know. The biggest downside is that the alternative ammo type is actual dog water. Ah yes, I'll use these grenade rounds in these tiny corridors. What could possibly go wrong? All this truly means is that decision paralysis shouldn't stop you from using a weapon you think looks cool. There aren't that many guns in the game, and by the third act, you'll probably have more ammo than you can actually carry on your person. The sound is another high point, as it helps establish some top-notch tension. Outside of combat, the music is almost entirely saved for cutscenes, so you're mainly left with this ambient droning sound. It starts off subtle enough, but that can change quickly when you enter a room with an enemy. The low hum becomes more pronounced, and only gets louder when you get closer to the threat. You already don't want to be fighting anybody when it's unnecessary, but this is the game literally telling you that fighting is a bad idea, so you'll do your best to sneak around every replica you see. All the while, the sound is effectively breathing down your neck, and based on some rooms later on, that low hum can cut through the silence and put the fear of God into you. This is all without mentioning the music, because only when they notice you does the combat music start to play. Feels like it's evoking a chase. It's so discordant and frantic. It's like the soundtrack of anxiety. From the initial scream to the pounding music, the enemy is doing everything in its power to try and smother you with fear. And I love it, but you probably won't be listening to it for very long, because you'll either be pumping lead into them or booking it to the nearest door. Because, yeah, it's expected of you. That's honestly my biggest complaint with the soundtrack, because outside of listening to these songs to make this review, I didn't even recognize like half of these. The boss music is different. You'll still be hearing the pots and pans banging together, but it's less crazy, more focused. That's because the chase is over. Now, you're cornered. Despite all that, I'd still say that all of the game's best tracks are tied to the cutscenes, and where the music during the fights makes you want to escape, the music here is ethereal and melancholic. You've been listening to some of these tracks already. Cicada Sirens and 1000 Eyes knocked it out of the park with some of these. I don't want to show off all of the good ones here because if you want to hear all those tracks, you already know what to do. But, to those still here, I want to air some grievances. Despite me having a lot of good things to say about the gameplay earlier, there are some problems. Here's my real issue. In most other survival horror games, if you enter a room but aren't prepared to deal with what's inside, you can effectively reset the room. In Signalis, however, it seems that enemies that patrol don't get their position reset upon re-entering a room, which can be an even bigger pain if you, say, sneak past an enemy into a safe room only to bump into them on the way out because you got unlucky with the patrol pattern. Very cool. Also, speaking of bad luck, I don't know if it's tied to the specific parts of an animation, but enemies have a tendency to slide towards me when they get staggered. This doesn't even happen all the time, so I don't know if it's just me or whatever, but I'll just swoosh right on. This last thing is a huge nitpick, but why do some modules take up inventory space when equipped? Like the eye camera and the shoulder. The shoulder-mounted flashlight module takes up inventory space after it's equipped. I get the literal Steam screenshot item taking space, but the flashlight always rubbed me the wrong way. Hey, so I finished this script back in, September, and I uninstalled the game after I beat it, and yeah, I got busy with a few personal things, but then someone told me Signalis got an update in the spooky month. Not only did they add more lore in the form of the Neat, but also some new gameplay options, like expanded inventory and an option where modules don't take up inventory. So even if you have the inability to handle inventory management, I won't judge you. Anyway, back to the video. So the last thing to cover would be the stories and the spoilers. If my praise of this game got you even a little interested and you don't want to get spoiled, go to here. So, who exactly are we looking for? If we look at our inventory, the current picture we have is of Alina Seo, and we even find various notes showing that she was here at some point on the Sierpinski. But if I flew across the galaxy to the Oort cloud, how am I back on the planet Lang? And who's Ariane? Let's start with the easiest to explain. Ariane Young originally lived alone with her mother on a station in Rotfront, and it was here her mother taught her to operate radio equipment. She grew an appreciation for art, music, and was generally taught how to be a decent human being. She was later given the opportunity to see more of what life had to offer. With the help of her aunt Camilla, she enrolled in the nation's own Mandelbrot Polytechnic High School, and going off of what we know about the nation, it was a very eye-opening experience. There was definitely more, but it wasn't what she hoped for. Her life consisted of going to school and then to work at the Ito's picture shop. One day, she was developing photos which showed the 5th Venetan Infantry Division Unit 12, and noticed someone specific. Someone who she shared a striking resemblance to. This woman. She looked happy in the photo. Is it possible for my life to be like hers? Would I ever be allowed to have a better life than this? Taking the train home, there was a poster for the Penrose program, an off-world scouting assignment, and with it, Ariane found her answer. I mean, it was either this or the Sierpinski. It's not really much of a choice. Emboldened by a new direction in life, she enlisted in the military after high school and got accepted into the program. While in the Penrose, she was assigned a replica partner, LSTR-512. Although she initially wanted to keep herself emotionally distant, Ariane would eventually cave due to the lack of anything aside from ship maintenance. Emotional barriers gave way to companionship, and eventually, love. 1,500 cycles of mission time will have passed when you receive this message. By now, you should have become fully acclimated to your new life aboard your ship. As you approach the Oort cloud, your search for new worlds will begin. Remember to rely on your replica to assist you in maintaining your vessel. We all wish you great success in your mission. Billions of miles away, the Empire, the nation, who cares? They were free to do whatever they wanted. All they had to do now was find a planet they could settle down on. There are problems with the Penrose program. Never mind the fact that you're making a dinghy of a starship travel to the edge of our galaxy. Never mind the fact that being so far away from the sun, meaning that whatever's out there is probably not safe for my gamer girl body. And even if it's theoretically possible, why not send a full team in a better equipped starship that doesn't have the lifespan of Kita Tanaka? The real kicker lies within the Phase 3 report. 3,000 cycles. With the end of the operational lifetime of your replica unit approaching, it is time to prepare for the final phase of your mission. If you have not found a suitable world for landing by this point, accept that you will not. Life support systems and reactor shielding will soon begin to fail, and radiation may begin to leak from the cooling system. We recommend you do not attempt to prolong your suffering by reusing old filters or rationing supplies. We suggest you ask your replica, while it's still functional, to spare you a slow and agonizing death, or that you take permanent rest in the cryogenic pod. Remember, you will die having served your nation by partaking in a glorious demonstration of our power. The odd use of resources, the skeleton crew, and demonstration. Was this entire mission just optics? The Penrose program was made with the same philosophy as a Potemkin village, but instead of showing off to the Empire with fake houses, they made damn spaceships. Was the nation doing so well that they could fling resources into space? I'm not so sure. Alternatively, is the nation losing so badly that the Penrose program is a last-ditch effort to salvage something for the nation? I definitely don't know. What matters now is that even being billions of miles away, the nation of Usan's cruelty can still be felt by Ariane in the form of cancer. As the reactor shielding started to decay, so too did Ariane's health. Although determined to survive, Ariane made Elster promise her something, to kill her if she began to suffer from the horrors of radiation sickness. But just like a certain someone I knew who let his girlfriend move in before global lockdown was enforced, by the time problems started showing up, Elster felt she needed to ride it out. Understandably upset, Elster did her best to postpone fulfilling that promise, while Ariane was confined to the cryopod. Unfortunately, Elster was also affected by that silly little reactor leak, and ended up dead before they could find a place to land, leaving Ariane in an agonizing state. Unable to sleep, but not truly awake, medicated by her cryopod's life support, all the while the radiation made her lose all appreciation for being alive. For another 2,000 days. Wait, how did the ship even last that long? And we still didn't get how we traveled to 2 different planets on foot. Now, let's talk about ESP. In space. The Empire of Usan worships a power dubbed bioresonance. Those attuned to this phenomenon were granted psychic powers. One particular bioresonant was the founder of the Empire itself, the Grand Empress. Her immense will bent humanity into the Empire of Usan and lifted us to the stars. It was her power that imbued life into the first of the machine servants, that now carry the weight of the Empire on their carbon steel backs. Interpreting this figuratively, she manipulated the minds of mankind and united everyone under one banner, leading to the creation of the replica units, and the advancement of space travel. Taking it literally, bioresonance lets you bend reality. Although not on the same level, we see bioresonance in the form of the Colibri units, which have the power to manipulate emotions and create illusions. Why this matters is because in the latter half of the game, we find out that Ariane has been calling out to you this entire game, in the form of the magpie signal. Whether she was aware of her powers, it's hard to say, but deep under the Sierpinski facility on Lang, the workers there found something. They unknowingly stumbled upon a tear in space and time, and within it, a strange gate. The replica commander of the Sierpinski, Falk, decided to venture forth. After venturing beyond the gate, when she came back, she began to suffer from a sudden sickness, so she confined herself to her chamber and began to dream. While it's unclear what exactly she saw, we've been here before, at the start of the game. Beyond the gate was the Penrose 512. Yeah, bioresonance, combined with her horror nap on the Penrose, literally transported them into a different dimension. Trauma-powered transportation. If I could put her on the suffering chart, she'd be somewhere between Snake and Marie. Or maybe she'll just share a spot with Sigurd over there. This gate connected the Penrose to the Sierpinski through a place called Nowhere. Ariane's dreams and memories infected Falk as she succumbed to illness. The incident of the Sierpinski isn't a disease. They're all suffering from super cancer just like Ariane, which is being broadcasted by Falk from her comatose state, with her own bioresonant powers. This is what those 5G truthers didn't want you to know about. The line between dream and reality began to warp, similar to the Grand Empress, albeit in a more twisted way. So, how much of this is actually happening? The way I see it, all of it. These are places that exist within the world, but they're being warped by powers that we can't ever understand. Not only does the nation have trouble recreating bioresonant technology, by the time we get to Rotfront, we're seeing a lot of places stitched together. A better question would be, how many times have I been here? And how long has this been going on? It doesn't matter. We have some place to be. We were dancing to that song they start the broadcast with. We fell asleep watching that movie we had seen before so many times. If only I could take us back to that time when we were happy. These memories are mine now. You wanna bet? What you decide to do during gameplay dictates the ending. There are a bunch of variables like how many enemies did you kill, how many NPCs did you talk to, how many broken doors did you interact with. Yeah, that last one took a while. Even after multiple playthroughs and getting all the endings, I still have questions. Due to the cyclical themes brought up, does fulfilling the promise break the cycle? Or does the game never truly end? Am I even playing as Elster 512, or am I simply another unit possessed by her memories? Or am I something else entirely? Is this game just an allegory for a failing relationship? And what's the deal with eyes in this game? Like, everyone at least loses one. There's the eye module, and the Mina kind of looks like a big eye, so is that TV looking at me? I don't know if anyone, besides Rose Engine themselves, truly knows the answers to my questions. But that's the beauty of art. If you truly resonate with something, it makes you think. You can discover things and interpret a narrative in any way you want. If you're focused on searching for the right answer, then good luck because you have your work cut out for you. Or you can simply take everything as is and spin your own story, as long as it has meaning to you. To the Signalis historians, you may have noticed I glossed over some details important to the lore, meaning that there's way more to cover, and unlike our best boy Adler, I'm not motivated or smart enough to dig deeper. I've been busy going to my 9 to 5, and without fail, I play Limbus Company for the whole workday, and I still get murdered repeatedly by Ricardo. But you want to know who is capable and shown proof of their dedication? Indie Xplorer and Cristiferbeast are two chads of the Signalis community that have been able to compile most, if not all, of the story into digestible content. So, if you want to know more about the lore, then you know where to explore. Or if lore isn't what you're after, just watch Atelier's animations on Twitter. They're very good. Signalis is a game that has the DNA of other media all over it, making references but not solely relying on them in order to make a good impression on the player. Signalis does the metaphorical 2.5 twist and sticks the landing perfectly on its weird horse legs. It's a love letter to survival horror, and a cautionary tale about the horrors of Sesbian Lex. I fully recommend it. I wish I had an excuse as to why this came out so late, but hey, at least I'm being somewhat consistent. Thanks for watching, and based off of my habits at work, I'm gonna try taking this content creation stuff seriously. So I mean it when I say there's more to come in the future. I have 2 choices for the next video, and they both involve sports. That sounds scarier than the cancered up Lego people. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.